The Weasley family's poverty was never abstract. It was visible in the walls of their house. The Burrow stood outside Ottery St. Catchpole, leaning at improbable angles as though each floor had been balanced on faith and magic rather than stone. It was a home grown upward in mismatched bursts, each addition added when another child was born, more necessity than design. To strangers, it looked on the edge of collapse. To the Weasleys, it was the only place that felt whole. Inside, the house carried the same story. Furniture was mismatched, chairs patched with charms, and curtains repaired until their colors no longer matched. Chickens roamed the yard, supplying eggs, while a garden stretched to feed 9 mouths through hard summers. A ghoul rattled endlessly in the attic, left undisturbed because removing him would require time and money the family didn't have. Poverty here meant nothing was ever discarded. Cauldrons dented from years of potion work were repaired, and clothes patched again and again until they barely resembled their original form. The Burrow's upkeep consumed constant effort. Arthur and Molly relied on spells to plug leaks, enlarge bedrooms, and strengthen walls, but each solution was temporary. Magic stretched resources, but never created true comfort. The house stood not as a sign of prosperity, but as proof of how far determination and improvisation could carry a family without money. The Weasleys' finances rested almost entirely on Arthur's single ministry salary. He worked in the misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, a small department buried deep within the bureaucracy. Its function was narrow, to investigate enchanted Muggle objects, bewitched cars, charmed radios, or cursed toasters, and make sure they didn't endanger either Muggles or the Statute of Secrecy. While the work was essential in preventing chaos, it carried no prestige. Compared with the Aura Office or the Department of International Magical Cooperation, Arthur's post was invisible, and his salary reflected that obscurity. Ministry pay followed hierarchy, with higher grades reserved for departments tied to law enforcement, diplomacy, or pure-blood politics. Arthur, viewed as eccentric for his obsession with Muggles, had no chance of advancing quickly. The culture of the ministry rewarded connections, alliances, and ambition, qualities Arthur never pursued. Colleagues who flattered senior officials or moved into more political departments secured promotions. Arthur remained where he began, content with work he loved, but forever underpaid for it. This left the family dependent on a single modest income to cover food, bills, and school costs for 7 children. Without inheritance or outside earnings, every galleon Arthur brought home was stretched past its limit. During Voldemort's first rise, he had chosen stability over risk by holding on to his ministry post, which protected his family but locked their financial ceiling in place. That one decision shaped nearly 2 decades of living hand to mouth. The scale of the Weasley family alone guaranteed financial strain. With 7 children born close together, the costs of raising them overlapped for nearly 2 decades. At one point, 4 of them were enrolled at Hogwarts simultaneously, each requiring their own robes, cauldrons, quills, and textbooks. Even if some items were reused, there were limits. Wands had to be unique. Cauldrons wore down, and younger children often needed replacements long before older siblings' equipment was free to pass down. This cycle meant there was never a financial break. As soon as Bill and Charlie left school, Percy, the twins, Ron, and Ginny were still in line, keeping expenses constant. The Weasleys could not stagger or delay purchases. Hogwarts' yearly requirements made them unavoidable. For Molly and Arthur, every September was a season of scrambling, stretching Arthur's salary across lists that seemed endless. Unlike smaller families who had a few years of reprieve between children, the Weasleys lived in a continuous loop of school costs, with no chance to recover in between. Hogwarts may have promised a free education, but every Weasley child arrived each September with a list that drained the family's budget. Robes had to be replaced as they wore thin. Cauldrons dented and cracked under years of potion work, and parchment and quills vanished quickly in classrooms. Most items could not simply be conjured. Gamp's law prevented magic from creating food, clothing, or currency, so they had to be bought in Diagon Alley with real galleons. Some costs were unavoidable. Wands, for example, could never be handed down. Each one was matched to its wizard, meaning every child required a new wand from Ollivanders. Ginny's second-hand wand was an exception born from desperation, not tradition, and it caused as many problems as it solved. Potion ingredients added another steady drain. Items like boomslang skin or powdered root of asphodel had to be purchased fresh, and Snape's harsh standards punished anyone who cut corners. The hidden expense came from textbooks. Hogwarts frequently switched editions or entire reading lists, rendering hand-me-downs useless. Gilderoy Lockhart's year as Defense Against the Dark Arts professor was infamous, requiring families to purchase a full set of his expensive works. For the Weasleys, these sudden costs were impossible to plan for, forcing last-minute sacrifices at home. Even when the children did their best to reuse what they could, the school itself kept moving the goalposts. For wealthy families, these costs were routine. For the Weasleys, each September was a financial crisis, a reminder that free schooling still carried a price they could barely pay. Quidditch magnified the Weasleys' financial struggles because broomsticks were not cheap tools, they were luxury items. A good broom was the difference between keeping up with peers and falling behind, both socially and athletically. Draco Malfoy flaunted his Nimbus 2001, while Ron relied on a second-hand broom so worn it shook during matches. For a child trying to prove himself, the broom was more than equipment. It was a symbol of belonging or exclusion. The costs extended beyond the broom itself. Maintenance, spare parts, and protective gear for players like Fred and George added new expenses. Quidditch may have been central to Hogwarts life, but for the Weasleys, it was an optional cost they could barely afford. Their children participated, but always with a reminder that they entered the game at a disadvantage. For wealthier families, brooms were gifts bought without thought. For the Weasleys, each one was a painful calculation. Allowing their children to play meant further strain, but denying them meant exclusion from one of the most important traditions of wizarding youth. If one image defined Weasley poverty, it was hand-me-downs. Robes were patched and restitched until they barely held together. Shoes were worn long past comfort, and cauldrons were dented from years of use. Each child inherited what the previous had outgrown, regardless of fit or condition. Ginny entered Hogwarts with a second-hand wand and second-hand books, while Ron wore robes shiny at the elbows and sleeves that never quite fit. The stigma of second-hand life weighed as heavily as the objects themselves. At Hogwarts, where appearances carried social currency, Ron was mocked by Draco Malfoy for his robes and broken wand. To wealthier students, second-hand items marked him as lesser, and this ridicule underscored the invisible line between rich and poor families. Hand-me-downs were practical. They stretched Arthur's modest salary across 7 children, but they also carried hidden costs. They undermined confidence, set the Weasley children apart, and reminded them daily that their family's survival depended on never wasting, never buying new unless absolutely required. Arthur Weasley's job was steady but never upwardly mobile. The Ministry of Magic rewarded political loyalty and social connections, and Arthur had neither. His fascination with Muggles was dismissed as eccentric, and his open advocacy for their protection branded him a blood traitor in a culture dominated by pure-blood elitism. These views kept him sidelined in a department few valued, where promotions were rare and salaries modest. The structure of the ministry compounded this. Departments tied to law enforcement, international affairs, or high-level administration received funding and prestige, while Arthur's office was obscure and underfunded. His work prevented disasters, but brought little recognition. Colleagues who cultivated alliances or bent to the politics of wealth advanced quickly, while Arthur's reputation and ideals held him back. His personal interests deepened this stagnation. Hours spent tinkering with plugs, radios, and batteries enriched his curiosity, but yielded no financial return. Each evening given to hobby projects was time not spent advancing his career. Arthur's passion shaped his character, but in practical terms, it came at the cost of income and status his family desperately needed. The Weasleys' poverty was not just the product of their choices, it was magnified by the society around them. Prices in the wizarding world created sharp divides. At the Quidditch World Cup, a single pair of omnioculars cost 10 galleons, a sum equal to weeks of budgeting for the Weasleys but pocket change for the Malfoys. Broomsticks revealed the same contrast. A Nimbus 2001 or Firebolt could cost a fortune, far beyond Arthur's salary, while Ron wobbled on an old comet that highlighted the gulf between them and their wealthier classmates. This disparity was tied to inheritance. Wealthy, pure-blood families passed down gold, property, and influence through generations. A Malfoy child entered the world with a vault of treasure at Gringotts and the political weight of a name that opened doors. The Weasleys, despite being pure blood, had cut themselves off from those circles by rejecting blood supremacy. Their reputation as blood traitors meant no patronage, no marriage alliances, and no financial safety net. Social pressure deepened the disadvantage. Lucius Malfoy, with both wealth and influence, ensured Arthur's department remained underfunded, keeping him professionally sidelined. Other ministry colleagues looked down on Arthur's eccentricity, leaving him without allies who might have secured promotions. In a culture where reputation often translated directly into opportunity, the Weasleys' principles carried a financial penalty. They stood outside the old networks of privilege, left to scrape by, while others flourished on the benefits of ancestry and wealth. Even with so little, the Weasleys consistently chose to share what they had. The Burrow was always open, to family, to friends, and even to outsiders in need. Harry Potter found not just shelter, but genuine belonging there, and this hospitality came with real costs. Every extra meal, every covered train fare, every gift meant stretching Arthur's limited salary even thinner. Molly embodied this generosity most clearly. She knitted sweaters not only for her children, but also for Harry, scraped together coins for treats, and ensured every guest felt welcome at the table. These acts built a household defined by warmth, but they also drained resources that could have been saved for the family's own needs. Generosity in wizarding culture was a source of pride and respect, and the Weasleys upheld it fiercely. Yet their insistence on kindness, even at the expense of their budget, ensured that financial progress was always sacrificed to preserve their values and community bonds. By the later years of the Second Wizarding War, the Weasleys' finances began to change, but too late to erase decades of scarcity. Arthur received promotions as the ministry reorganized, gaining modestly higher pay and recognition. Fred and George's joke shop exploded into one of the most profitable businesses in Diagon Alley, creating wealth the family had never known before. These improvements lightened the burden, yet they arrived after years when the children had already endured patched robes, second-hand books, and constant worry over costs. The older siblings' careers had offered little immediate help. Bill's work abroad and Charlie's dragon studies consumed their own resources, leaving little to send home. Percy's estrangement cut off what might have been a useful contribution. Even with later success, the Weasley household had already lived through the defining years of hand-me-downs, broken wands, and financial strain. The poverty that shaped them was not undone by new money. It left a mark carried forward, showing how long-term hardship defined their family identity even when circumstances eventually improved.